All right, everybody, welcome back. Start off with a great question. So today's lesson is on libraries and how to use them in your code. And so there's a question about namespace conflicts. So what if I have? So there was actually a great example of this. Somebody posted. Let me go grab it. Yeah. So we have Java time.instant and Java temp.instant. So let's look at how to deal with that. I don't think that, let's look. I don't remember if Java has import, yeah. Yeah, there we go. So the first thing to point out is that the import statement is actually not technically required to use stuff. So let's go put this back. And let's get rid of some of these. Let's get rid of the random one. Because I always can get away with using the fully, yeah, I'm going to have to use it over here too. The fully qualified, this is called the fully qualified name of the class. So you'll see, rather than using random, I use java.util.random. Java still has to be able to find that class, and in this case it can because it's part of the Java standard library. And so if I was in a situation where I needed to use two imports with the same class name, what I would do is I would basically, I haven't run across this very often. It's a great question. It's pretty interesting. It's interesting you found two with the same name within the Java standard library, which is pretty cool. So if I wanted to do like import java.util.instant, now I have instant as part of my namespace that I can use. And if I wanted to then create a java.temp.instant object, I could create, java.temp.instant. Is that the name of the package? Yeah, okay. Equals new. I don't know if you can actually, if there's actually a public constructor for this class or not, but we'll try it. Let's see, java.util. Oh, it's java.time. Yeah. Java.temp.instant. Is that a thing? Let's look. Java temp. No. Is that an actual library, or was that just an example? Let's see. So this is java.time.instant. I don't see that. Oh, what is this Java? Temperature. No. Okay. Yeah. So if you run into this situation, this is the way around it. Is to use these fully qualified imports, and IDEs like IntelliJ or Eclipse will typically help with this type of thing when you have this. It's not particularly common. I'm trying to think of times when I've run across this, and it doesn't come up very often. But if needed, you can always, rather than using the short name that you get access to through an import, you can always use the fully qualified name as well. And this is true of everything in the Java standard library. So I can do java.lang.string s is equal to new java.lang. Oh, got it spelled right. That works fine, right? It's angry about this line now, so I'll get rid of it. And then now it's angry about this line because I didn't use it, so I'll get rid of that too. Yeah, so I can always use these fully qualified names. The import syntax is really there to make your life easier because throwing these around. Java's a language where I actually have to use the variable types fairly often, and so having to always fully qualify them is a bit of a pain in the butt. But again, I can't think of too many times when this has come up. If you are creating your own library at some point, you definitely want to think about this, particularly in Java, right? Because within your own library, if you end up with a class name conflict, then that's, probably not great. So even though, and if we were talking more about libraries, which we're not really going to do too much in this class in terms of creating them, we would talk a little bit about where these names come from, right? Like why is it java.lang.string, right? To some of you, this might remind you of something else that you've seen, which are these URLs. And to some degree, the import syntax of Java is sort of similar. If you create your own package, so we have some, I don't think I'm going to be able to import from it, but we have some of our own code that we maintain for this class. And when we do that, we use this This is called reverse dotted decimal notation. So you'll see it's sort of like a URL, but it's backwards. So the rather than cs125.cs.edu.illinois.edu, which is the domain name for the website, our package names all start with edu.illinois.cs.cs125. And then past that point, we can use kind of whatever additional names we want. This convention exists to sort of help package maintainers avoid colliding with each other. So if you think about, you're creating the Java language and you want people to be able to create libraries and share with each other and publish their work, you need to come up with some sort of convention to make sure that people's names for things don't collide. So if I want to publish foo and you want to publish foo, then it's kind of like whoever wins. And there are package management systems that work more that way. So the package management system for JavaScript, for example, works that way. It's just kind of like whoever gets that name first gets it, and they can have it as long as they publish something there. In Java, the convention is that you choose a name that represents something about the organization that's publishing the packages. So we also publish some other things at com.github.cs125 Illinois. That's another name that we use because that's another namespace that we occupy, right? So we have a GitHub organizational account at cs125.github.com, and so by reversing that, we get a name that we use for some of our other packages. So this is sort of the core stuff that's maintained by Java doesn't follow that convention. It follows java.whatever. And these are parts of the Java standard library. That's the convention that they use. Rather than, com.sun.java, they just have abbreviated it. Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, if you had two like that, that's what you would do. You would just have to use. Now there are, some of the more some of the sort of variants of Java that have emerged recently, like Scala and Kotlin, have better syntax for this. So in Kotlin, when you do an import, you can rename it. You can say, import java.util arrays as array helpers or something like that. And then throughout your code, instead of using arrays, you use array helpers. And so this helps to differentiate cases where you actually do have these types of functions. Java doesn't support this syntax. Maybe they will someday. I don't know how hard it would be. I don't think it would be very hard, but they don't right now. So there's no way to do this sort of aliasing. It's a good question. Other questions? Yeah. So and again, like I said, I mean the import syntax. You can do all this without imports. I like to show this because for a few reasons. First of all, imports make it very clear what's happening, and that's one of the reasons I think people use them. Not only are they more convenient, but when you look at a program that has imports, and a lot of Java programs, I mean, even simple ones, when you're building stuff, particularly using a framework or using code that other people wrote, it's not uncommon to have 10, 20, 30 imports at the top of the file. Most IDEs will sort of collapse them together to avoid showing you all that, but yeah, no, I mean, you can, the import list can get long, because again, you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? You're building along with other people. You're using their code to help you solve your problem. And so to do that, you typically will use this import to bring the library into the program in a way that's more convenient to use. So the focus today is on parts of the Java standard library. Once we start doing work in Android, we'll see a lot more use of other imports, including from third-party libraries, including from parts of the Android libraries that Google publishes that for developers to use. So this becomes, in the wild, or when you're building real things, a real big part of how you write code in the modern world. Again, nobody builds things. If you're trying to solve a problem and really have an impact, you don't spend time rebuilding things that other people have already done. You use those libraries. And again, I've always found this to be incredibly cool because, the website that you guys use, various tools that we built for this class, I put a lot of work into them. Other students have put a lot of work into them. But if you look at how they work, they're still built on all of these other tools that other people have contributed to the community. And so periodically I'll go and I'll kind of grab the latest versions of those tools and pull them into the project. And every time I do that, I'm kind of like, like my code got a little bit better, despite the fact that I did no work, because somebody else probably made some changes, maybe fixed a few bugs in their library, or made it a little faster, or added a few features that maybe I'll need to use in the future or whatever. So, it really is this very weird way of collaborating with other people, right? In the sense that, I don't know them, they don't know me, they don't know that I'm using their code, and yet, we're actually all kind of working together. And, the things that they do help me, and when I publish things for other people to use, the things I do help them, despite the fact that they're kind of invisible to me. So it's just a neat, it's a neat thing about software, and particularly about kind of the open source ecosystem for software that we've created now. I don't think there's an equivalent of that in any other field, and it's fun, right? There are lots of opportunities, particularly once you've done this for a little while and you get a little better at it, and you get excited about a particular problem, you might start working on some programs or some apps or tools, that are devoted to understanding that particular problem, and you might find that other people start using the things that you've created, and then you have this like kind of small user base, and it's kind of interesting, right? Because you start to have a relationship with people, and they'll file a bug report against your project, and you'll be like, oh man, that's frustrating. Like I can't, I've got to fix this now, and particularly kind of with these small projects, you almost feel like. Once you start interacting with people that work on stuff, you do sort of develop these weird relationships, right? Or it's like, I love what you did, but it doesn't do this one thing, or could do this one thing a little bit better, and so it's fun. I found that to be a really fun thing to do. Questions? Other questions? This can be short today. I mean, this is one of those things that's a definite power tool, but really is just something that we'll continue to use. So one thing I'll clarify here about our playgrounds is that the playground examples that you guys are able to write, and the homework problems that we'll have you do typically only will give you access to things inside the Java standard library, and sometimes not even those things. So for example, later in the class, we're going to ask you to actually implement some sorting algorithms. If I ask you to implement a sorting algorithm, I don't want you to just use arrays.sort, right? That would defeat the purpose. And so for the homework problems, access to libraries is configured on a per problem basis. So for example, for today's homework problem, we set it up so you can access anything in the Java standard library. In the future, we may clamp things down and sort of force you to implement some of these things yourself. Is that the right thing to do in the wild, right? Would I ever tell you to write your own sorting algorithm? No, or use arrays.sort. But when I'm trying to teach you something by having you write your own sorting algorithm, then it's important that you just don't use the one that's built in. Past that point, so, and this gets into stuff that's beyond, out of scope for this particular lesson, although stuff that we will see down the line. So if you want to, let's say you find some library online that seems really useful and you want to use that as part of your project, there's this process of getting access to it. The playgrounds that we have set up for you you'll have access to some third-party libraries, but it's really just sort of coincidental because those are third-party libraries that we've used as part of the playground backend itself. So you might find some really cool, and there's a bunch of organizations and groups that publish useful libraries for doing various things in Java that you can find online, and there's sort of a process of adding those to a project once you start using an IDE or some sort of build system, and we'll talk about all this later, but it's not really in scope right now. We may, over the next couple weeks, when we look at certain types of problems, set up our playground so that you have access to some third-party libraries for doing various things, because they're super useful, right? And again, a lot of times when I'm writing code and I have some sort of problem to solve, I mean, the first thing I think is like, did somebody already solve this problem? Is there likely to be a library or a tool or something else out there that I can access that's going to solve the problem for me? Because again, to the degree that I can, access code that somebody else is maintaining, that is a huge win for me, because now I can focus on solving the parts of the problem that are unique to me, and the things that I sort of care about. Good question. Yeah. How do we know exactly what to port when it's unclear from the context? This is, it's one of those things that there's no clear answer to, right? This is sort of an art, not exactly a science. So it really depends on the problem, right? So you can think about, today's, and make sure I don't have a solution for it in there. Okay, yeah. So today's homework problem, right? You could, so Google is definitely your friend here, right? So we'll say Java date library, and then, we might find ourselves to the date class. We may start reading about this and stuff like that. And this isn't a bad place to start. There are solutions to the problem that use this library. This particular website, I don't know how to pronounce it, Baildon, has a lot of really useful Java tutorials. So here's one that looks like it's pretty recent. That's the other thing to look at, and unfortunately JavaDoc doesn't always do this, but Java as a language is quite old, and the ways of doing things change over time. And so when you can find a tutorial or some documentation that's more up to date, it's usually better to rely on that. And you'll start to recognize certain sites as being sort of reputable, right? This is a particularly reputable site, in my opinion. And so, you can start reading about this, and it might have some examples about how to do certain things, and this might kind of lead you in the right direction. And so, just starting to look at documentation like this is one way to do it. You can see, let's see here. This looks like it's a third-party library. Now this is interesting. If you start reading this, it says, after Java 8, so Java in version 8 introduced some new libraries for dealing with date and time that didn't exist before. And it looks like before they existed, this is what you would use, but now we're on Java 15 or 14 is what we use in the playground. And so we don't necessarily want. And so, there's some poking around that you're going to have to do, right? Sometimes you can, let's see here. So sometimes you can, I think the question asks you to use this particular format. So I could Google that. I could say, okay, how do I do this? And this might actually get me pretty close, right, to all the way there with some of these examples. Again, some of these are similar to what you would find. And so there's some hunting around. One of the things that's a paradigm shift for people when they start programming on larger projects is the fact that you spend so think about the homework problems right now. I mean, this homework problem has this one's a little bit different because this is one of the first where we're actually requiring you to go out and actually do some work on your own, do some investigative work, figure out how to do this, what library do you need to use, So, but in the past, it's typically been like you would read the problem and then you would just work on it, right? It would be clear from the problem what code you needed to write. So we're going to start the MP in a couple weeks, and at that point, what you're going to see, and we're going to warn you about this, but it's still going to make a lot of people annoyed, so I can't do much about that. But the fact is, when you work on larger software projects, you spend a lot less time writing code and a lot more time searching the web and reading documentation. And that's just the nature of the beast. Because, particularly when you're trying, I think date and time parsing is a great example. You might think that you could solve this on your own. It's not that easy, though. And I'm not saying that we couldn't write code together that would solve this problem, but I don't want to. Date and time is one of those things where there's so many exceptions, there's so much weirdness to it. Some months have more days than others, and and like there clearly is code in a library somewhere that's able to do this because you guys are going to use it today, but you don't want to write that code. Trust me, like especially this type of stuff. Oh, it's terrible. Like it's because it's totally illogical, right? Like computers. It's really satisfying to write computer code when you're solving a problem that has a lot of structure and regularity to it. But when you're dealing with stuff like date and time, where it's all just weird special cases, like some years have more days in them than others, right? Like February doesn't even have the same number of days every year. So like think about trying to deal with all of these weird corner cases and stuff like that. And so it's like, no way, I don't want to do that. The amount of time now again, like some of you really enjoy writing code, and I hope that all of you really enjoy writing code at this point because it's fun. But you do not want to solve this problem yourself. You don't want to tackle this by trying to write the code yourself. It's the wrong approach. Even if it feels fun at first, like, oh, I get to write some code. I'm so tired of reading. I don't like searching the web. And, I have to run multiple searches, and sometimes the results seem out of date. It's hard to figure out exactly how to do it. There's a bunch of different examples, and I don't understand it right away. And so sometimes it feels like, oh, I'm going to sit down and write the code myself. No. Like it feels slower at first to be grinding your gears a little bit as you trawl through Google search results, as you try to understand JavaDoc's super ugly and like searching through how do I create this particular thing and whatever. How do I use this library that I found that seems useful, but doesn't work right away or doesn't work the way I think it should or whatever. It's way better to do that. It's a different type of thing. And so that's kind of a transition that we're going to take you on. Once we start the MP, you guys will spend most of your time doing this. The homework, I always tell students, the homework problems, most of your time is spent coding, and you only spend a little bit of time reading the description. On the MP, it's the exact opposite. You're going to spend most of your time reading the instructions, searching around in all the complex code that we're going to provide you to figure out what's going on, and squinting at stuff that you haven't seen before, searching the web, asking for help, talking to the course staff on the forum and in office hours. And then at the end of the day, after hours and hours and hours of work, you're going to write like 2 lines of code in the right place that does the right thing. And then you'll solve the problem. But that's actually much more like what real programming is like. Because, real programmers that work on large projects typically spend much, much more of their time trying to figure out what's happening, reading code, reading documentation, doing searches, talking to other people. They don't write, no one measures productivity of programmers by the amount of code they write per day, because that's not a measure that makes any sense. Right? It encourages people to do the wrong thing. Right? Frequently, the right thing to do is to get to the point where you understand the problem and you understand the other resources that are available, and you picked a library that works really well and is going to help you solve your problem and is maintained by somebody else, by the way. So that's the other great thing about using a date-time library. Some person out there in the world is maintaining that. And so, next year when, at some point in the future when we get rid of daylight savings time, which is one of these other completely bizarre special cases that daytime libraries have to deal with, time, like on some magical day every year, like the time suddenly jumps forward or backwards, like good luck handling that. So someone else is doing that for you, right? It's almost like you've hired them for $0 to do all of the grubby, messy, convoluted work required to convert milliseconds since 1970 to a string. And then they're doing that for you for free. And so that frees you up to do other things. So frequently, again, when you work on larger projects, the best approach is not to try to do everything yourself, right? Like if you went to your manager and you're like, well, you asked me to print off the current time on the homepage of our app, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a new library for doing that. And he'd be like, no, or she'd be like, no, you're fired if you do that, right? Like, forget it, your colleague over here, she solved the problem. She already has a solution because she just used a library. Like, there's no way that you're ever going to get that right. So again, spending the time, hunting around, searching, reading documentation, fumbling around, trying things, experimenting. That's how you work on real code bases, right? Rather than just sort of like practice problems like the ones that we've been doing up to this point. So the homework problems are tremendously useful, right? That's a huge part of how we are teaching you to program and to think like a computer scientist. But at some point, if you actually want to do real stuff, and this is why we do a small Android project in this class, you do need to get comfortable with this much more, I don't say it's messy, it's just different. It's a very different style of development. It's reading first, it's experimenting first, it's testing first, it's fumbling first, it's documentation first, it's search first, right? It's, it's not like, write the entire thing from scratch all by myself. In Android, there's no way to do that anyway, right? You're already built in on top of a platform that exists. So anyway, all to say that there's no great answer to that question. There's no, except that there is, right? And the answer is Google. And maybe you don't like that answer, and it's like, oh, I'm paying all this money so that some professor can tell me to use Google. And yeah, but that is sort of, I shouldn't say unfortunately, because it's actually really a great solution. Now, like anything else, search takes practice. And as someone who's been doing this for a while, like I think I have, and you will as well, you'll develop like a fair amount of wisdom, I guess is the only word to use, like wisdom about how to do this, right? What sites do I trust, right? How do I craft search queries to return results that are useful? What are the libraries that don't show up in queries? So for example, that query that we just did looking for information about how to do this problem actually did not turn up the easiest way to do this problem. And you might just have to run a couple of other search queries on different terms. And the reason is because the name of the library that provides the fastest route to a solution to this homework problem is just sort of counterintuitive. Like when you Google Java date, Java has a date class. You're not going to find this other class that's actually a better fit for this problem. And so, I'm pretty sure that I did this myself at one point, which is that I started using this, the date class in a project. And then after a couple of hours, as I was fumbling around with it and I was reading more and more, somebody was like, oh no, don't use that anymore because this other thing is much better. And I was like, oh wow, that's cool. This seems like a much better fit, but I didn't find it right away, right? And so it's just, so now I know it's there, right? And I'm purposely avoiding saying the name because I don't want to give away the solution to the homework problem, but, because you can solve it with date, but that'll work. But again, this is one of those things that just gets lodged in the back of your mind. Now, when you work in Java, it's like, oh yeah, there's this other class with a slightly unintuitive name that I need to remember to look for when I'm solving problems of this type. So, within industry, is it typical to have someone in charge of managing libraries that a project can use, or is it a team effort? I don't know. I haven't worked in industry in decades. I think it would very much depend on the type of project, the type of project that you're actually working on. So, at some companies, it really depends on the project, right? So at some companies there are, so if you're doing your own software development, like let's say you're doing an app as a side project, you're like, I don't care, I'll use anything. Other companies typically have, will have at least, I think, some vetting process for external libraries where it's like, because some of them come with licenses. Those licenses may not be compatible with the license that your company is using. Certain companies are nervous about using open source libraries because it's like, how well maintained is it? So for example, it's very unlikely that Google, as part of their core Android libraries, would utilize some open source project that's being maintained by like one person out there on the internet somewhere. They just wouldn't do it, right? It's just too much risk, right? Because now you have this dependency, and if that person like stops working on the project or stops maintaining it, or there's actually been there's a really well-publicized case of the maintainer of a really important JavaScript library who actually ended up in prison for a while, which I guess is a difficult place to maintain. And it was like some traffic accident in Russia or something. It's like this completely lurid story. You can go and Google this, I think, and find out about it pretty easily. But anyway, so the guy who was maintaining this for years, it was like this core JavaScript library that was used by lots and lots and lots of tools was suddenly like, yeah, I need to find another maintainer for this project because I'm going to the clink. So again, like a big company like Google would probably not take that risk. They would probably say, let's find someone in-house who can do this, or do we have something similar that we already use? So vetting process, I think yes, right? I think there would be a conversation about can we use this or can we not use this? But it depends on the project, right? Some projects, if they're sort of more, a little bit more freewheeling, might say, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let me. Yeah. So you can probably, you could say Java long to ISO 9, and there'll be code examples, right? Like I suspect that the answer to today's homework problem is probably on Stack Overflow somewhere, right? Because there's a couple ways to do it, and this is not like I tried to ask something today that was not super weird. So question about, so look, we're not going to try to stump you on a quiz with some weird method from a Java library that you're not used to. If we ask you a question on a quiz, typically, first of all, on quizzes, we don't ask you to use even parts of the Java SDK or the Java standard library, sorry. If we did, we would provide like a little blurb about it or maybe a link to the Java doc or whatever. As far as Java doc, all I got to say is you got to figure out how to use it, right? It takes practice. You'll get better at it, but Javadoc really is it's the dictionary, right? It's the reference. I think in many ways, again, I know people like to see code examples and stuff like that. I'm not defending Javadoc. I think Javadoc could be a lot better, but it's worth putting some time and energy into figuring out how to use it better, so that you can become more effective and a lot of it has to do with understanding how to read it, how to find stuff, like what certain parts of it mean. It's a great resource, right? I mean, I think again, it is the reference manual for Java. Like that is, I don't want to say the documentation because documentation is typically written in a different way, but it's the reference manual, right? I mean, doctors have, a manual of different medical diagnoses or drugs or whatever that they can prescribe, right? And they use that when they, have to, find a way to solve a particular problem, right? Mechanics for cars have this, like a book, right? That's like, and typically owners don't have access to this. It's not the owner's manual. The owner's manual is written at like a 5th grade reading level, right? The technical manual for an automobile is like much thicker and has all of the gory details that technicians need. And so, when they have some weird error code from the engine, they look it up in this manual and it has some ideas about what might be wrong and steps to follow and stuff like that. So, a lot of, cooks have recipes and things like this. I mean, a lot of professions have these types of reference manuals that people in that field need to learn how to use. And Javadoc, if you're a Java programmer, is one of those. And then I think just, experimenting, right? Once you have a little bit of a grip on what a particular library is, so I think, maybe the best thing to do is to kind of use, Stack Overflow, Google /Javadoc and have them complement each other, right? So the things that Javadoc's really good for are like an exhaustive list, right? And of every single thing that instance, that thing can do. The other cool thing about Javadoc is that once you start using Android Studio or IntelliJ or another IDE, those typically have very good integration with Javadoc. And so you can find a little piece of code from Stack Overflow, you can add it to your project, and then you can create like a new instance of something, and typically the IDE will like automatically suggest a bunch of different things. You'll hit like, date, dot, and then it'll pop up with a bunch of different suggestions about different methods that you can call on an instance of a date object, right? And if it's like, oh, I want to print off the month of the year or something like that, you might see like a get month method, and then, so there's lots of different ways to kind of like experiment, right? Of course, the get month method, that it's the documentation that's showing you is literally like pulled from the Java doc for that class, for that library. But so there's a lot of different routes to this, but at the end of the day, I mean, this is the better you get at some of this stuff, the more quickly you're going to be able to go once you start writing your own code. And there is just like I don't know, it takes practice. It's a skill like any other skill. Being able to take a library, sometimes people use the word grok it, kind of understand it at a high level, what it does, get it into your project, start using it, get it to do what you want it to do, and be able to do that quickly is a skill, takes practice, but once you get good at it, it's incredibly powerful, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, I need to do this hard thing, and I grab this tool, and I can give you dozens of examples of this, right? Like the playgrounds on our website, that editor that you guys use that does brace matching and syntax highlighting and stuff like that. I didn't write that. Like, that's a huge project, that would take me like 5 years to do probably, right? Even if I dropped everything and just worked on it full time. Somebody else built that. They maintain it, right? They update it and they improve it. And all I've got to do is just figure out how to get it onto the page, which is way, I mean, I've seen some of their code because I've had to go looking for things and stuff like that. And man, it's a huge undertaking. And so I'm not going to solve that problem. Just going to use it, figure out how to use it, get it in there. That takes some practice, but you guys will get that. I think what I want to encourage you to do, though, as much as we can, is to be willing to go through that process, to not always jump. Again, when I started thinking about, okay, I want to have kind of a workbook format for the website, I didn't think, well, let's see, I could spend a couple of days searching the web to find an editor that I can embed on the web page and figure out how to use it, or I could spend 2 years writing my own. It's a really easy choice. And so sometimes, for beginners, the trade-off there is not quite as clear. And they like writing code, and so they're like, oh, let's write our own editor. That sounds like fun. And you're like, oh, geez, like, good luck with that, right? It's just, these things are hard. And so it's easy, I think, to underestimate how much time and energy it takes even to build simple stuff. And so, like the Coder's book has pointed out a couple places, I mean, programmers start to get lazy. And I think lazy is sort of an unfortunate word to use. I don't think it's lazy. They start to realize that they will go farther by working with others, and by allowing themselves and encouraging themselves to build on top of what other people have done, right? Rather than just like racing into writing more code themselves, a well-maintained library that solves a problem and prevents you from having to solve that problem is like, a gift from heaven. So as far as quizzes, just, don't worry about that, right? I mean, I understand during time pressure on quizzes is not the time that you want to be hunting through Java doc. So, so for example, in the past when we've asked you to use string methods, those are methods that we've had you use on homework before. So we sort of prepared the ground, shall we say, and then even on the quiz, we'll try to, we'll probably provide a link to the Java doc, and we'll provide some hints at methods that you might want to use and stuff like that. And that's what we would do in the future. But I don't anticipate doing, typically on a quiz, what we're trying to get you to show us is your ability to kind of, the coding questions that we put on quizzes are really there to exercise your ability to write code independently, the kind of code that you would need to be able to independently write in order to be a productive software developer and computer scientist. So, like loops or something like that, right? I mean, if you need to look up how to write a loop every time you write a loop, you're just not going to make very much progress. And so there's certain things that you just have to have under your fingers, as they say. And it's no different than, playing an instrument, or like if you play the piano, just knowing certain chords, certain scales, like everybody has to know that stuff. That's different than like playing a piece of music, but if you can't play a certain scale from memory, then it's going to be difficult to play anything more complicated. But we're not asking you to perform something, like that on a quiz. We're asking you to do this stuff that we really want you to kind of have under your fingers, like civil inheritance, relationships, stuff like that. So the other questions, these are great questions today. Talking to other, as Lee says, talking to other people is always great too. If you work on a software development team, asking other people so if someone came to me and was like, hey, what library would you use for this? I was like, oh, do this, right? Or look at that, right? Because I remember in the past solving similar problems. Even if your team isn't solving that problem in the context of a particular thing you're working on with them right then, the people on the team probably have experience with the language and worked on other projects that might have done certain things, and they might give you some pointers, right? Or at least some places to start. It's like, oh, I remember that there's a library that I used once upon a time for doing this, and maybe it's still maintained, and check it out because it might be helpful. So yeah, these are all good suggestions. Fundamentally, what's cool about this is that part of, at least programming in Java, where we start to be able to work together and import other people's contributions into our own projects, which is cool. Trust me, again, when we start work on Android, you guys will see how this plays out, because even just writing a simple app in Android, you're doing, 0.1% of the work, right? Just running an app on Android, any app, is building on top of millions and millions of person hours over tens of years, right? In terms of all the technologies that just have to work to get your app onto the phone and run. And then past that, it's up to you. But you are. I hope this helps you make aware of just how much is boosting you, right, as a programmer today. And the tools and the frameworks and the delivery mechanisms, just installing a piece of software on another computer 10, 20 years ago used to be a way harder task. And now we've got these, app stores and ways to distribute stuff all over the world. So now, when you guys are finished with the MP, you could publish it on the App Store, and one of your grandparents could download it, right? This is all really new and super exciting in terms of being able to just share your things with other people. But again, it gives you this sense of you are very much being lifted by all the other work that the community has done to get us to this point. So it's incredibly exciting time to be doing this sort of stuff, because there's so much that's boosting you, right? You've got so much of a tailwind whenever you start a project now, because there's so much prior art. There's so many people building things that will help you. There's so many people building frameworks that will help you. That's all there waiting for you, and all you need to do is insert the unique part that is your sort of creative contribution to solving some problem. All right, if there are no other questions, I think we will wrap up for today. Tomorrow we're doing another data modeling exercise, probably be a little bit more of kind of a library use / data modeling. I think we're going to talk about serialization. And then next week we'll get into some new topics in object-oriented programming. In fact, one of my favorite topics on object-oriented programming is sort of how we close out this unit of the class. So hope everyone who's around town is enjoying the beautiful weather, and I will see you all tomorrow.